everybody. Well. We got the results last night, did we not? And the most interesting thing about the French results, and just remind ourselves that Emmanuel Macron, who is running as an independent, who is called a centrist, as if to say he is a wonderful person, although was a minister, though never elected, was a minister in the socialist administration. He won. Marine Le Pen of the Front National was second. And how interesting that the Conservative Party candidate was knocked out, Monsieur Fillon. There was a hard left communist candidate who was equally knocked out but still got 19%. And the Socialist Party, the party that currently have the President of France, got 6%. Coming in sixth with 5% was my friend Nicolas Dupont-Aignan, who's a very moderate Eurosceptic, and all the rest got sort of 1.5% or less. So the most significant thing to say is that the candidates of the official Conservative and Labour parties were, certainly in the case of the Labour Party, completely and utterly wiped out. So we have two outsiders, two complete outsiders, who on the 7th of May will contest the French presidency. And I'm asking you tonight, which for Brexit Britain would be the best result? Would it be President Macron or would it be President Le Pen? And boy, this matters, doesn't it? The whole European project, right back to the 1950s, was about France and Germany being welded together. They are the two most important countries in this union. Now, what both of them say, I think, is very, very interesting. Macron wants to cut public sector jobs. He wants to slash corporation taxes. He wants the European Union to tighten integration between Eurozone countries. And Le Pen wants France unconditionally to walk away from the euro. She wants the automatic expulsion of illegal immigrants. And she wants extremist mosques, not all mosques, but extremist mosques, to be closed down. She also backs a lower retirement age of 60 and a 35-hour working week guaranteed, which actually, I think, in the modern world is by far the most extreme bit, in many ways, of her programme. I can't see how that is going to be good for French finances. So that's what their main platforms are. But what is really interesting is what do these people think about the United Kingdom and about us having voted for Brexit? Well, you may remember a few weeks ago, I interviewed Marine Le Pen, and I did it because Macron had been given a stage by Theresa May. He'd been into number 10. He'd done a big press conference on the steps of number 10, and I thought giving Le Pen an interview would redress the balance a little bit, bearing in mind the huge numbers of French people living and working and voting in London, and I'm hoping perhaps we'll hear from some of you this evening. Now, Macron on Brexit says that it is a crime and that Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson are responsible for this crime. He says that post-Brexit, Britain faces servitude rather than taking back control. What does Le Pen say? She says when she heard the Brexit result, she felt a sense of relief that the UK had found the keys to the jail. And when I interviewed her, she did raise the prospect of a bilateral trade deal between France and the United Kingdom if she's the president. Now, you can tell me whether you like or dislike Macron or Le Pen, but that isn't really the question. The question is, what would be best for Britain? President Macron or Le Pen? And I'm going to say it has to be President Le Pen, because Macron will club together with Juncker. And wasn't it significant that Mr. Juncker has praised the result? President Obama has praised the fact that Macron came first. George Osborne, of course, has praised the fact Macron came first. And the European Commission have now given up any attempt at neutrality, and they're backing Macron in the next round. So I'm asking you, who would be better for Brexit Britain? President Le Pen or President Macron? To get involved, call me on 0345 6060 973. And bear in mind, you may better hear this, I'm a touch bronchial today. I'm not feeling very well. I'm a weak man, so now could be your opportunity to give me a very serious kicking. Equally, you can text me at 84850. You can tweet me on @LBC, not forgetting the hashtag Farage and LBC, and watch us live on LBC's Facebook page. And I'm going to ask Namoon in Harrow, what do you think, Namoon, is best for Brexit Britain?
So the first thing is, so good evening first.
Good evening. You're quite right. What's happened to manners? Absolutely.
So I'm not a fan of yours, but I'm not here to pick a fight with you.
There'll be a lot of very disappointed people.
I will try to stay away from the European argument. Just focus on one aspect.
Yes.
You're asking what is best for Britain.
Yes.
You said clearly that for Le Pen to come into power, having understood her economic program, it probably wouldn't be good for France, and most likely would be a disaster. However, you still wish for Le Pen to be elected in France because it will be good for Britain. You forget that you keep saying all the time that even though you're not a fan of the EU, you want to be good friends with the rest of Europe. So why would you hope that for a friendly country? Would you hope for France to become a basket case for a?
No, my own view, is that Le Pen's economic programme would not be very good for France. That is my view. Not so much coming out of the euro, but this insistence on retirement at 60 and a 35-hour working week. I can't see in the modern world, when you've got to compete against Singapore and China and India and goodness knows where else, how that works. But, how a president, how a prime minister and an Assemblée Nationale run an economy can be changed once every few years. And I've never ever backed her or said I would vote for her. I'm answering a different question tonight.
No, but that's exactly what I'm saying. But you don't want a failed state not a failed state, but a failed economy as big as France next to Britain.
Well, and I get that. However, Namoon, just let me just say one more thing on this. However, Macron insists on France remaining part of the euro, and I do not believe that France and Germany ultimately can survive together inside the same economic and monetary union.
You're saying that France staying in the euro is worse than Marine Le Pen applying her program on France?
I am, yes. Yes, I am.
Okay, so that's one view. But anyway, that's fine. But the reason why I was calling is because I'm concerned about the way Marine Le Pen has managed to change the image of Front National in France, but also in the UK, for example. The fact that people are willing to talk about her as if she was just another politician, for me, is a problem. Because I grew up in France when Jean-Marie Le Pen was in power, the president of France.
Yes.
And at the time, it wasn't Muslims who were the guys they were after. It was the Arabs. For Arabs, Muslims is equal to them. Okay, I'm not an Arab. I'm just in case you're thinking, but for me, I remember growing up there and hearing the kind of messages that we used to say. So for me, the normalization of Front National, the fact that people are willing to treat them as if they were a normal party is a big problem. And remember one thing: you don't know whether it's a terrible tragedy or a bad thing you've done until things are done. So obviously, I'm not going to compare to Hitler,
Oh no, please.
Like however, when someone is going to come into power and do bad things, you only know after they've done those bad things.
Well, Namoon, can I just say this to you?
Don't be so.
Can I just say this to you? That I have sat in the European Parliament since 1999, and Le Pen Senior has been an MEP throughout that whole period, and Marine Le Pen has been there since 2004. So I have watched the French Front National close up for nearly 20 years. And I mean, I will say this to you. At no point in those 20 years did I want UKIP to do a deal with the French National Front. I, like you, felt that many of the things that were said by old man Le Pen were chauvinist, extremist, divisive, negative, unhelpful in every way. But I would say this to you. She's standing virtually herself as an independent candidate. I mean, the word Front National barely appears on the literature. It's all about Marine and her image. And I would say this to you. I don't think we should judge her by the sins of the father.
One last point, and then I will not take more of your time. But the question I would ask people to think about is, in France, the further, even if you don't want to call it an extreme right party, the party further on the right is the Front National. There's no other party further on the right than Front National. Now, the question I'll ask people is, where did all those people who used to vote Front National, when they were seen as an extremist party, go? They just disappeared? France is no longer a racist country? There's no racism in France anymore?
Well, of course.
Well, still hidden behind.
Of course there is. But also, Namoon, the reason she's done as well as she has is because lots of socialists, patriotic socialists, have completely given up with the French Socialist Party. And Namoon, and by the way, I thank you very much indeed for your call. And a broader point for everyone here, it's the young people who are voting for Marine Le Pen. It's the under-40s that have put her into this position, which is different to the Brexit vote in the UK. And on Twitter, I get Le Pen all the way, yes please. Where does backing Macron fit into Theresa May's hard Brexit strategy, says Johnny P. Well, that's a mystery to me. Why did the Prime Minister invite Macron to Downing Street and allow him to do a press conference outside the front door of Number 10? I don't get it. I really don't. How anyone can say Brexit is a crime, a democratic vote is not a crime. Well, Frexit needed next is what Nick and Kate say on Twitter. Barry in Chessington. Would Le Pen, President Le Pen or President Macron be better for Brexit Britain as we go into the Article 50 process?
Well, good evening, Nigel. First of all, I'd just like to say it's an absolute pleasure to be speaking with you this evening. First of all, to kind of not beat around the bush, let's get straight to the point.
Yep.
Obviously, the answer here is so clearly Marine Le Pen. Just to quote exactly what you said. For a politician, a man of democracy, to stand up in front of the world, Nigel,
yep,
and say that Brexit is a crime is awful. Now, obviously, we need somebody within the EU from another country who understands, even if France get their referendum and they don't vote in favour, we need somebody who understands, who's willing to give the French people a say. As you said earlier, Brexit should not be referred to as a crime. I honestly do not see what this man is going to contribute to Brexit, and even to France. I mean, to kind of go slightly off track, if you may let me.
Briefly, Barry, yeah.
Briefly, Nige. I mean, this is a man, who used to work for the big banks, the establishment, similar to actually everything that we overcame with Brexit. I mean, Emmanuel Macron is a man who's going to stand up and say, hello, everybody, hello, ladies of the EU, hello, men of the EU. Yep. Come on, follow me down the garden path and I'll give you everything you want. Yes to Germany and yes to all the other member states.
Well, he's certainly, Barry, he's certainly a Euro fanatic.
We need somebody who's willing to stand back democratically, give the French people their say, because, Nigel, I mean, as you said earlier, you've been, against this whole EU establishment
I have.
for many years.
I have.
As you said in one of your famous speeches, they really did sneak the Lisbon Treaty through.
Oh, they're a dishonest bunch. Barry, I'm going to have to leave it there, matey. Thank you. Backing up one of Barry's points, Lisa Gordon on Twitter says, I wouldn't call Macron an outsider. He only set up En Marche to distance himself from toxic Hollande. He is Hollande Mark II. Lisa, you make a good point. Not only did he work for the big banks, but he went to the ENA, the École Nationale d'Administration. If you think Eton dominates Britain, you ain't seen nothing with the power of the ENA in France. They may have cut off the head of the king, but my goodness me, they've got their own new ruling class. And Macron, certainly Lisa, is a part of it. Right now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:15. It's going to be Macron v Le Pen to become president of France. And I'm asking you, who would be better for Brexit Britain? Keith on Facebook says Le Pen is mightier than the sword. Bradley says, I don't get it. Your first caller was upset that Marine changed her party from the days of her father, even kicking him out. Bradley, you're right. When I interviewed Le Pen, and by the way, if you want to see that interview, listen to that interview, go to lbc.co.uk and it's all there. I thought one of the most telling things I said to her, that many of us, myself included, had great reservations about the Front National because of its links actually to anti-Semitism, going back over decades. And how did she respond to that? She said, look, I even kicked my father out of the party. It's perhaps, in a way, the most powerful part of that interview. Carter says on Facebook, Marine won't be president in 2017, but she will be in 2022. The French will be disillusioned with President Macron and the EU over the next 5 years. And John says the political landscape of Europe is changing, not only in France, but across the EU. The open border policy eventually will not exist. So is it to be, for Britain's perspective and for our interest, who's best, Macron or Le Pen? I'm going to ask Mike in Wickford how he would answer that. Good evening.
Oh, I would say Macron, because the drift to the right of Europe, all of these parties that have managed to find someone reasonably respectable who doesn't sound like Adolf Hitler to cover up a loose affiliation of random lunatics and raving racists like you did in your party, sir.
Right.
And she has in her party.
Right.
So basically what happens is that these
You
people...
sound like Diane Abbott, Mike. You sound just like Diane Abbott. I mean, do you actually think... Do you actually think, Mike, that people who believe in nation-state democracy and border controls are raving lunatics? Do you really believe that?
Actually, what I think is, sir, I think that's the headline that you choose. But if you actually dig into any of your party within any sort of great depth and understand most of their views, what you were leading was really the leftovers of the far right that were trying to get in as far as they could to power without actually showing themselves up as the rampant racists that they were. And that's what's happened at Le Pen's party, and that's what almost is going to happen in other places. And we need to stop it now, because once people like yourself and people like Le Pen get power, the division in Europe and in the communities that our communities will suffer will be atrocious.
I know. Wouldn't it be awful, Mike? Can you imagine, Mike? Can you imagine if democracy broke out all over Europe? Wouldn't it be ghastly? Much better to have unelected old men running us and giving us a new flag and a new anthem and a new identity. Is that what you want?
Well, no. Here's the deal. You make it as if it's a polar choice between having to have the unelected moguls in Europe or having to have a party that basically hides racists in its ranks everywhere is the other choice. That is not the choice. That does not have to be the choice.
Don't tell me it can be reformed, Mike. Please don't tell me it can be reformed.
You can come out, but you don't need to have parties like yours in power to do that. You don't need to have powers like Le Pen's in power to do that.
If it wasn't for people having the guts from left-wing backgrounds, centre backgrounds and right-wing backgrounds, but people having the guts to back UKIP and push it along, there would never have been a referendum. We'd never have voted for Brexit. Mike, stay there. I've got someone here who might disagree with you. Andy in Cardiff, Le Pen or Macron?
I think Le Pen, but I think there's going to be a problem with Le Pen.
Yeah.
In that my view is she might actually squeak the vote and actually get the vote to become president, but the polls results won't show that. I think Macron's too clever, too rich and too powerful in Europe to actually let her win, even if she wins.
Are you suggesting Macron could fix this?
I think that Macron already has. I mean, all you've got to do is look at what's happening now. Theresa May calls her...
So, Mike, there we go. You've heard a different opinion, Mike. Andy thinks Macron's a really bad man, but you think he's a good man, do you?
Do you know what? I think he's not the far right. And also, I think, it really makes my skin crawl. Whenever you hear the far right losing, the first thing they scream is fix. It's not a fixer. It's just civilised people making an obvious decision not to let lunatics in power.
Quite right. Quite right, Mike. And also, backing that up, in this country, a fantastic electoral system that we have for the general election, which is so fair and so balanced that I was able to lead a party to get 4 million votes and 1 seat. Isn't that wonderful? Mike, I thank you. Andy, I thank you too. I do struggle with this, that much as I disagree with many opinions on the other side, I think these people have a distrust and dislike of democracy, but I don't actually try and demonise them on a personal basis, and Mike seemed to be doing that to almost anybody who believed in nation state. Peter, in Wimbledon, which of these two presidents is the best for Brexit Britain?
Well, as far as the Brexit Britain is concerned, Nigel, I would like to say that Brexit is the crime, and it's a crime not committed by those 52% who voted for it, but the people like yourself, the liars who sold the lies to those people. When it comes to lies, we had 50 years of being told it's not about political union. We can be a sovereign country and be in the EU. In fact, when she was Home Secretary, Theresa May told us we could control immigration and be in the EU. And everybody 40 years ago thinking it was a common market and it became a political union. Surely the lies are on one side, not the other. Well, Nigel, if you want me to explain, I'll explain to you what it is. What's the best would be for you people like yourself is for European Union to collapse. And that's the only way Britain-Brexit, the strategy and disaster can succeed if European Union was to collapse. But this would be a disaster for the whole world, not just for the benefit for Britain. So as far as the Brexit Britain is concerned, absolutely, you can put all your money on Le Pen. But you know what? She's never going to win because
too many good men and women died during the Second World War fighting Nazis and fascists to allow them to get back to power again.
Peter, do you honestly think that Marine Le Pen is a fascist and a Nazi? Do you genuinely believe that?
Apple doesn't fall far from the tree. She knew she can't win any election with her dad being on board. She has to show a sign that she's kind of changing the movie. But at the end of the day, she is what her dad was, how he brought her up.
Oh, I see.
And exactly,
so you really believe that all of us are shaped by our parents, do you, in that way?
Well, of course, our education, our upbringing, that's what makes us what we are.
Wow, that is the most far-right. That is the most far-right theory. That is the most neo-Nazi theory I've heard on this show in the months that I've been presenting it. I think to condemn Marine Le Pen for what her father has said and done over the years is, Peter, frankly, just wrong. Are you prepared to accept that maybe she might be a better person?
Nigel, it's like your party. You've been telling us we are ahead of the queue. Now we are back of the queue with the state. And I know you and your pals, you're going to be okay. Your friends, Goldman Sachs, and your white supremacists in the United States, they're going to look after you. Even if the Brexit is going to go pear-shaped and this country is going to collapse, you guys just can't stop lying. Another day on LBC, there was one of the high flyers from UKIP, and he was telling the nation that our trade with the European Union is to 12-18%. That's another big lie, you know? And you just can't
It's about 10%. It's about 10% of our national economy. About 10% of our national economy is exports to the European Union, Peter.
Yeah, our exports and imports are 40 to 50% of the European Union countries, yeah? And now we believe in that just because we just hate foreigners. Just because people like...
Oh, Peter, I mean, it must be... How do you cope when you get up in the morning? I mean, you must be so upset with this outbreak of democracy in Britain and all across the West. I'm sorry, Peter, you know, we're all entitled to our views and you can be opposed to Brexit, but rather like Mike, the previous caller, to sort of come up with this assumption that everybody on the other side is somehow bad and evil is wrong, Peter. But thank you for your call. I'm going to ask Vidar, Le Pen or Macron? What's best for Britain, Vidar?
I think Macron, absolutely, all the way.
Yep.
I think I think you've played it very well. I mean, UKIP is very much Nigel Farage, all the way, isn't it? The same way National Front in France is Le Pen. So it's good for the individuals, but when it comes to strategy, I think you've got this one wrong, because if Europe dissolves into chaos with Le Pen trying to dismantle it, I think it's going to be absolutely terrible for Britain. It's going to distract from everything that we do here. It's going to distract, and I think she's going to trump your rhetoric, because ultimately I think in the UK we're still more moderate than certain elements in France. So I think she would definitely take the center stage in Europe and make Brexit a secondary issue with far less resources to deal with it.
Okay. Well, Vidar, unlike the previous callers, you put an intelligent argument, which is Le Pen wins, the European Union disintegrates, and that may not be a good thing for Britain. And I understand that argument. I would just answer it by saying, Vidar, whether it's Le Pen in 2 weeks' time, and the odds say it won't be, whether it's her in 2 weeks' time, or whether it's something else in the years to come in Hungary or wherever it may be, I still think the project is doomed and it's never going to work. That's my view. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30 and time for the news with Rupert Bartier.
Labour leader Jeremy...
Following last night's results, I'm asking you, who would be better for Brexit Britain, President Le Pen or President Macron? But before we get there, something really odd happened to me today. I found myself actually agreeing, or I found Nicola Sturgeon actually agreeing with me when she said we should not allow the Tory party to escape the accountability for any misdemeanours they may have led to them buying the last general election. So Sturgeon basically saying that the reason the general election was called is that the Conservatives had to have a majority in the Commons of, well, it's between 12 and 18, it depends how you measure it, and that up to 26 constituencies were potentially facing by-elections or perhaps even worse. Nicola Sturgeon, I do agree with you. And a little thing, Aaron Banks has now said he won't run for the Clacton-on-Sea constituency. Originally, he was going to take on Douglas Carswell in this seat. Carswell's not standing there for anybody. Banks has withdrawn. And I know the journalistic corps will be very, very upset indeed, because he would have brought an awful lot of colour to the campaign. I'm going to ask Aidan in Whitechapel. Aidan, Le Pen or Macron? Who's best for Brexit Britain?
Macron, but we'll find out how it turns out. I wanted to ask, what do you think of UKIP's with the strategy for the elections?
Well, I think of UKIP's strategy, well, I haven't heard it yet. They're going to be launching, Aidan, on Thursday. They have a big launch on Thursday somewhere in sort of Dagenham, Essex, that part of the world, and we will find out what their big pitch is on Thursday, so it's a bit early to comment. But you made the point before you asked me that question about Macron being unknown. I watched Macron's acceptance speech last night. It was the most vacuous political speech I've ever seen in my lifetime. Apart from supporting the status quo, Aidan, I have absolutely no idea what this bloke stands for. Do you?
No, but I know what Paul Noel stands for, and it was your party.
Well, look, there will be, Aidan.
You heard them today, was all over with the news, just attacking with the Muslims. That's the new strategy. Would you have done that? I was trying to give you the chance to...
Well, the new strategy, and it's not particularly new, the strategy is we want integration. The idea that 58% of Muslim women in Britain are economically inactive and 22% of Muslim women don't speak English, I think it's a problem, Aidan, don't you?
What about the percentage of white women or black women? Do you know them figures?
Well, black male unemployment is a problem, but
no,
certainly...
I was talking about women, so do you know there was the percentage for black women or white women?
No, I don't. I don't. But the percentage of white women, the percentage of white women who can't speak English, I will wager, is less than 2%.
Well, how do you know? Was it the Chinese? Was it the Latins? How do you know? Was it...
All right. I tell you what, Aidan, rather than getting silly, let me ask you, do you think that the Muslim communities in this country, whose population is growing very, very quickly, do you think they're fully integrated and the whole thing's a great success?
Of course not. Can't all be integrated. It's like any community. It's you can have problems, but just picking on the Muslim community is not going to help. If you're going to use a hammer to crack it with a nut, it's not going to solve the problem, is it? If you keep picking on Muslims every day, bad Muslims, then of course you're going to get bad with Muslims.
Yeah, I have to say, Aidan, myself, I did, particularly in Oldham, in one particular suburb of Oldham, what I saw there was a really great shock to me. People who'd been within those communities, in some cases for 20 or 30 years, that didn't speak the language, that weren't integrated at all. But, Aidan, to be fair, we will discuss this as the general election develops over the next half a dozen weeks or so, and I will talk about that, but not right now, because the question I'm asking you is we've got this 2-week runoff between Macron and Le Pen, and who would be best for Brexit Britain? I'm going to ask David in Newcastle that very question.
Hello, Nigel. How are you doing? You all right?
I'm fine, David. So what's best for Britain, Macron or Le Pen?
I personally think Le Pen. I don't fully know the full workings of the French politics, but one thing that I do follow strongly is someone who stands up with a little bit of integrity. And rather than having a globalist banker in charge of France, and whose hands are going to be shackled by Brussels yet again, it's going to Marie Le Pen being voted in, and obviously that'll be through a democratic process. I think it'll be yet another walkie-talkie, leftist in, leftist out in terms of Brussels. And at the end of the day, in terms of Brexit, we have to look out for our trade interests. France is our closest neighbour. Whether Brexit will come once Marie Le Pen comes in, but we want to open all of our borders and all of in terms of our trade. We want to trade with as many people as possible.
Of course we do.
And I think that'll probably be in our best interests. Macron's going to represent yet more tightening of the EU grip. So how are we supposed to be trading with that? And I think Le Pen will probably just open it up. And if Britain is going to go out of the world, after Brexit, why can't we start having countries like France and other countries follow suit?
I agree with that, David. But let me ask you, the opinion polls say that it's 60% Macron and it's 40% Le Pen. Do you believe those polls, or do you think that rather like Brexit and rather like Trump, she may have a chance?
Well, it's the year, the year of the underdog or the year of the unknown. I bet you Trump wasn't what his polls were, but that eventually happened. The same with Brexit. Polls is fine up until a point where the actual decision is made. So I don't really rate on polls, but if I was a betting man, I would say that I wouldn't bet against Le Pen if I was being totally honest. But
well, David, I think you're right. I think to write her off, as they've tried to do today, with the President Obama and Jean-Claude Juncker and George Osborne and the European Commission, and they're all lining up to say what a great president he will be, and no one is supporting Le Pen. Donald Trump was tweeting over the course of the weekend and said that he thought she would be the strongest of the candidates when it came to dealing with terrorism, but he hasn't gone any further than that. David, I thank you for your call. We will see. I suspect that she's not 20 points behind. I suspect that it's closer, but I do suspect she's got an awful lot to do. Ben on Facebook says, who's putting these callers through? James O'Brien? Well, I did say at the start of the show, Ben, that I was not feeling my sharpest and my best. So for those that have been waiting to come on and have a go, tonight was a good evening. And boy, we've had some. And Caroline says, well done, Nigel, for all your patience with those callers. It's just that I'm ill, Caroline. I couldn't fight back. I'm going to ask Abdi in Tooting. Abdi, Macron or Le Pen, what's best for Britain?
I'd say Macron is better by far.
OK. Why?
Actually, across a reasonable argument as to why Le Pen would be better. Everyone just keeps on saying, oh, she'd be ban terrorism. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
But in terms of economic policies, her protectionist policies wouldn't be good for us. It would only cause trade wars. And we all know how trade wars end. No one wins in the end. And also, I checked her website, and the policy says that she wants to slap taxes on foreigners coming in. So anyone from Britain who wants to go there, that would be good for them. And she also wants to do taxes on imports coming in. So realistically, would that be good for businesses in this country? No. Everyone just keeps talking about ISIS in their country. Fair enough. But business-wise, would it be good for us? No.
Abdi, your point is very interesting because it's a very similar debate about Donald J. Trump, isn't it? That Trump, in many ways, is protectionist. Le Pen, in many ways, is protectionist. But Trump has said he would make a big exception for the United Kingdom, something that Paul Ryan backed up the other week. Now, the Times had a story at the weekend that they thought the Trump administration would go for the EU before Britain. I don't believe it. But in the same vein, Abdi, when I interviewed Le Pen, as I say, it's there on LBC's website. When I interviewed Le Pen, I asked specifically about this, and yes, she feels that French jobs are being taken by undercutting coming in from the Far East and elsewhere. But when I asked about the United Kingdom, there was a very different attitude about French people living in London, British people living in Brittany, and about trade. So your general point, Abdi, that she's a protectionist and Macron is not, is right, but I'm not sure, as far as the United Kingdom, she poses us a direct threat.
But even if she doesn't do that directly, I think his stances on pro-business would also be good for us business-wise. I don't think she's like Trump. Trump in a bit doesn't have a set fixed ideology, and she keeps flip-flopping. I've been checking what she's been saying in 2012. She's changed a lot. So how can you trust someone like that? This Macron, although I know he's not been in politics for a long time, but if you look at his policies, the pro-business, I think that's what...
Does he really have any, Abdi? Because, I mean, OK, he has said some things about corporation tax, I grant you that. He has talked about cutting the public sector, I grant you that. But beyond that, I haven't got a clue what he really stands for.
But then again, you can say that about Trump. He said all this stuff before in the election, and you were all supporting him, and now he's changed on Syria. He's changed on the country. I don't know, he's talking about illegal immigrants in their country and all that. He's changed. So I don't understand why you were all rooting from Trump and still are, but now all of a sudden someone else on the other end of the spectrum, and you don't think he has a fixed ideology, and all of a sudden that's bad.
Well, Abdi, on this programme, I wasn't exactly thrilled, was I, about the Syrian airstrikes from Trump, and I did feel that was somewhat going back on what he'd said during the campaign. On the rest of it, I think Trump is doing his absolute best to be true to what he was elected on. Abdi, you raised some very good points. I thank you. You're listening to a Nigel Farage show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:45. Press and breaking news on the French presidential election. Marine Le Pen has announced she is temporarily stepping down as her party's leader to concentrate on the presidential bid. Now, I suppose there are two ways of reading that. One is that it's a further distancing of Marine from the old days of her father and the party, and it's genuine. The other is it's a cynical stunt to say she's not really standing as a National Front candidate. She's standing as an independent against Macron, who too is an independent. And if we can get any more news on that between now and the top of the hour, we will. Meanwhile, back to my basic question of who is best for Brexit Britain. Would it be President Macron or President Le Pen? I'm going to ask Kat in Belsize Park what she thinks.
Hi, Nigel. Privileged to speak to you.
Good evening.
I think it's pretty obvious, given that we are, whether all the UK people like it or not, we are Brexiting. And given that Macron has described Brexit as a crime, quote unquote, and says that he'll take British jobs in banking and in research and so on, and conversely, Marine Le Pen has spoken out in favour of Brexit and the independent futuristic stances it takes, it's very, very obvious which of the two candidates is better for Britain. Interesting that I lived in France for a long period of time, so I also have a perspective on how it is for the French. And certainly I've had a lot of excited calls from people saying, I proudly voted for Le Pen, which is good. They're taking an interest in politics.
Yes, I mean, that's certainly true, isn't it?
Yeah, the revival and excitement in politics on both sides of the channel.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But, Kat, the opinion polls do suggest she's 20 points behind. It's a heck of a lot to make up in 2 weeks, isn't it?
It is. I put 20 quid on her to win today, and only because the odds were pretty good, because obviously it does look less likely now, perhaps, that she'll prevail. But if you look at the Brexit vote, if you look at the Trump vote, you never can tell.
What price was it, Kat? What price was Marine Le Pen?
It's 5 to 1.
5 to 1. There we are.
Yeah.
I mean, we shouldn't
Good time to place the bet if you're feeling bold.
We shouldn't really be encouraging gambling on this show.
Of course not. No.
But if I was a betting man, which of course I am, I might have a think about that. Kat, thank you very much indeed for your call. I'm going to ask Ali in Barnsley, who's best for Britain, Macron or Le Pen?
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
I just want to say that I think Macron is the ideal choice, because I think he's at least reasonable to negotiate with. He shares a lot of values, the British values that we uphold in this country, and we fought for many years. We defeated, the British people defeated and made a lot of sacrifices along the way, and they defeated xenophobia. They defeated fascism. And it's really wrong of us to go back to those ideas, to go back. Do you really think, Mr. Farage, do you really think that this politician, Le Pen, who's chanting France for the French, this is our home, this isolationist, inward-looking, reactionary politician would think about us in Britain, would think about you as a British person? He would put the interests of the French people first.
Ali, I'm assuming that you were a Remain voter.
Well, I'm not even a voter. I'm a teenager, unfortunately. And
okay.
I'm someone who you would call a Remoaner. And
right.
I'm proud of being one, because
right.
I will stand up for what is right, and I still believe that we would have been better off, safer and stronger inside the European Union.
Well, Ali, whatever the good intentions of the European project were, rather like communism, which was 50 years before it, I'm afraid that it's moved a long way from that. And rather than it being a structure of cooperating nation states who are happy to give power to the centre, increasingly it's leading to resentment, division, and the growth, Ali, of real political extremism. Look at Greece and countries like that. And Ali, I would say for somebody who's young and you have an idealistic view of Europe, you're in for a miserable decade, because you're going to watch this thing break up. And Ali, I would say this to you, that provided we have a Europe of independent sovereign democracies that trade with each other and cooperate with each other, that will be a good Europe for us to be closely allied to.
What is the way forward, though? Is it isolating ourselves?
No, Ali, we're not. We're not isolating ourselves. Quite the reverse. It was the EU that was isolating us from the rest of the world. 85%, Ali, of the global economy is outside the European Union. The big growth isn't coming in Europe, it's coming in other parts of the world. And I do want us, genuinely, to be good friends with our next-door neighbours, but also to reach out to a bigger, wider world. And
very well, yeah. And I think, don't you really think that geography matters? We've got such a close market. We've got such close cultures and societies. Around our back door.
Do you know, Ali? In a modern global world, where at the press of a button you can transact business all over the world, the answer is actually not
particularly. But I thank you very much for your call, and, you know, someone there who really does believe in the dream of the European project, and there are people that do. I just think, in practical terms, it has basically failed. I'm going to ask John in Chelmsford, Essex, what he thinks. Le Pen or Macron? What's best for Britain?
Le Pen.
Le Pen. Yeah, why?
Yeah, definitely Le Pen. Macron's got no experience. I mean, he's a young man. He's got no experience in government. So why should everybody believe him? I know what you're going to say, but the thing is, Le Pen has been going for a long, long time. And I've always supported people that have a free mind, and she's got a free mind, and that's those other ones there. But I think that she is more inclined to bring France together again.
Well, Macron is a strange one because he's never, ever stood for election before. He was appointed finance minister by Monsieur Hollande, having worked for some of the big banks in Paris. There are arguments. I mean, Ian Dale, who was on the show before me, Ian would argue that actually he was a disaster as finance minister. But I would say this to you, John. One of the reasons I think that gap is going to close is this guy has never been tested under fire. And over the course of the next few weeks, both he and Le Pen are going to be under a huge amount of pressure. There is no negative story about Marine Le Pen that is not out there already. There could be all sorts of things about Emmanuel Macron. So John, I take your point, and I actually apply it more widely. He's untested, he's inexperienced, and I watched that speech last night, and frankly, John, I thought it was vacuous.
Yeah, and just a little pun here. I've just watched The Legend of Nigel Farage on the internet.
Right. Oh, gosh. Was it clean?
Oh, it was absolutely great. You handled yourself fantastically.
Well, that's very sweet of you, John.
Over the years, I've been watching you, and since I'm quite old now, so the thing is that I've been a Brexiteer for about 10, 15 years. And we voted Brexit, the whole family.
Yep.
And, you know, your views were there all the time. And they gave us great hope. And I think this country deserves people like you. I'm so sorry that you're not there now.
John, I am there now. I'm leading a group in the European Parliament, and I will do my utmost over the next 2 years to do the job properly. John, I thank you very much for your call and kind sentiments. I'm going to go now to Peter Allen, LBC's correspondent in Paris. What is this all about, Peter? What, is this some cynical ploy? She's standing down as leader of the Front National.
Hello, Nigel. Not too cynical, to be honest. It's actually quite straightforward. What's happened, she's appeared on France 2 television tonight, primetime television, the 8 o'clock bulletin, and caused initial absolute astonishment by saying that from tonight she was standing down from the leadership of the National Front.
Yes.
And she announced the reason she's doing it is, and her exact words were, it is essential to take leave of the National Front, and this evening I'm no longer the president of the National Front. I'm only the presidential candidate. I will feel more free and above partisan considerations. And let me tell you, Nigel, that was a tactic used by a gentleman called Charles de Gaulle.
Yes.
The most famous president in French history, really, who led France during the war years and founded the current Fifth Republic in 1958. And he would always argue that he was a man above bitter party politics and somebody who could unite the nation. So that's what
it's sort of country before party, basically, is it?
It's country before party and image before party. She wants to be far more like Charles de Gaulle and less like her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, who founded the National Front in 1972, and of course has got some very unfortunate criminal convictions associated with the racism.
Yes, and still has a whole series of views and makes utterances that have embarrassed his daughter so much that she's effectively kicked him out, hasn't she?
That's right, Nigel, and she wants to distance himself effectively from his electoral vehicle.
Yeah.
It was always the National Front. He came second, remember?
He did.
In 2002, he did very, very well. But it was as a National Front candidate. She thinks by ditching the FN, she might be able to appeal to voters who might not normally vote for the FN and triumph against Emmanuel Macron on May the 7th. That's really what it's all about.
Peter, fantastic. I want to talk to you more over the course of the next couple of weeks. This is a fascinating election that the whole world is watching, and I thank you. Well, my final thought on this, and it won't surprise any of you, is, of course, I see Macron as the enemy.
He's the enemy of nation-state democracy. He believes in the European project. He wants France to give away more power. He wants Brussels to be even stronger. And I can't see that's in our interests when the Junckers and others are all lining up to try and punish Britain. And whatever the sins of the past of Le Pen, and callers tonight saying she's her father's daughter, so she must be guilty, which I reject completely. Perhaps tonight, a clever move from her, saying she's no longer president of the FN. She's just standing as Marine Le Pen. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show on LBC. I'm back tomorrow from 7. At 10, it's Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive Bull.
Thank you, Nigel, and we'll have more on what Marine Le Pen is up to in France a little bit later. But we're going to kick off with